Today we look at Job 25, 6 and 7. And chapter 25 is a very short speech by Bildad. And it very much echoes what the other two have said, Eliphaz and Zophar. And also, Job used these same words, but when Job used them, it wasn't to accuse himself or to paint himself guilty. As when the other three use them as friends, they're trying to point out to Job, his sinfulness or how he has come about, and he says, dominion and fear are with God. He makes his peace in high heaven. Is there any number to his armies? Acknowledging the omnipotence of God, his power and might. Then, how can a mortal be righteous before God? How can one born of woman be pure? Even if the moon is not right or whatever, how much less a mortal who is a maggot and a human being who is a worm, and Job has been proclaiming, sticking to his righteousness, sticking to that, he has a good relationship with God, that he isn't a wicked person, but, the three friends keep trying to tell Job, you are indeed a sinful, wicked man. And in chapter 26, when Job begins his answer here, if you read it with our sarcastic voice, I think this is what you need to do. Oh, how you have helped one who has no power. How have you assisted the arm that has no strength. How you have counseled the one who has no wisdom and given such good advice. You got to have some sarcasm in there because Job is saying, everything you guys have said has not helped one bit, and, with whose help have you uttered words and from whose spirit have you come, and it's, you guys are here, but you're not doing any good. You're not listening to me. You're not helping me at all. Everything that you're saying and everything that you're doing, I understand and I agree that the wicked deserve punishment from God. But he continues to profess, like I said, his righteousness, and chapter 26 goes on with some of the, talking about who God is. And you could almost put some of this into Bildad's words, but Job is basically reiterating again, speaking again of what these three have said to him before about God. He stretches out the north over the void. He hangs the earth. He binds up the waters with the thick clouds, and the cloud is not torn. He covers the, talking about God's powers and God's abilities. And he says the pillars of heaven tremble and are astounded at his rebuke, By his power he stilled the sea, and so, again, the majesty, the power, the might of God. And then verse 14 of chapter 26, these are indeed but the outskirts of his ways, and how small a whisper do we hear of him. But the thunder of his power, who can understand? We don't understand God. Think about God. Why would he himself come to become a human as Jesus Christ, as this second person of the Trinity? Why would he come, the only begotten Son of God, as Jesus himself says? Why would he do that? Why would he die on a cross for you and for me? Why would he continue to send prophets to the Israelites? Why would he continue to listen when Moses pleads the case of the Israelites or the other prophets do? God is ready to destroy them many, many times, but he always has that heart of relenting, of mercy, of grace, and of forgiveness. And then in chapter 27, Job starts talking about the mercy of God, the unreachable, unfathomable mercy of God. And he begins it with, as God lives, kind of, on my oath, I lay my hand on the Bible, so help me God. It's kind of that oath. As God lives, who has taken away my might, and the Almighty who has made my soul bitter. As long as my breath is in me, the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. And it's, I'm I'm swearing this on the name of God, the Almighty, that, I will not speak falsehood. My tongue will not utter deceit. Far be it from me to say that you are right, that I'm wicked. I'm not going to agree with you. And until I die, I will not put my integrity away from me. So now he went away from the sarcasm of chapter 26 into the statement of what he truly believes, what he truly feels. I hold fast my righteousness and I will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. I feel no guilt. I feel no remorse. I feel that I have a good relationship, a right relationship with God. And I feel that way about myself too, but only because I know that my sins have been forgiven and that God looks at me through the eyes of forgiveness in Jesus Christ. That is where my righteousness comes, through my faith in Jesus Christ, who is the only Son of God that way. And then verse 7, Job kind of, rather than, he's been professing his innocence and his integrity, as God lives, no lie, and then may my enemy be like the wicked, and may my opponent be like the unrighteousness. For what is the hope of the godless when God cuts them off? When God takes away their lives? Will God hear their cry when trouble comes upon them? Will they take delight in the Almighty? For those who are wicked, who come into this catastrophes of their lives, is God going to hear their prayer when they have never in their lives come to God before, And this kind of puts me in a conundrum, because I truly believe that, if a person professes faith in Jesus Christ, faith in God, at some point in life, even if you've lived, boom, all the way up until just toward the very end, that, you live a life without God. But if we turn to God, when we turn to God, God listens, and God is there, and so then he says in verse 11, I will teach you concerning the hand of God, which is the Almighty. I will not conceal. All of you have seen it yourselves. Why then have you become together vain? This is the portion of the wicked with God, that they have calamities, that they have problems. The heritage oppresses, and their children are, and he just goes on with the calamities that befall the wicked. And that, will God listen when those wicked turn to him? They go to bed with wealth, but they will do no more. They open their eyes and it's gone. Terrors overtake them, and the east wind lifts them up when they're gone. It sweeps them out. It hurls them without pity. And this is the wrath that comes, and the punishment that comes, the separation from God that all of this is. And Job is saying that, he continues to say that I am not guilty. I have not done all of these things that you are talking about. I do not deserve punishment from God for the way I've lived my life. But when you look at the wicked, look at the wicked compared to me, and it's, I don't like to do that and say that, well, I'm better than somebody else, because I know I'm not. But in Job's case, there was a very definite line that way. And Job had lived his life rightly. And Job, I don't think, would have ever begun this profession that he's going through if not for his three friends. And I parenthesis mark those friends all the time, because they're just not being very helpful. But Job continues to profess and stick by his integrity and his faithfulness in God. He doesn't curse God. He doesn't turn against God. And this is what's important. We too. Calamities come in our lives. Accidents happen. Things happen in our lives. But do we turn against God? Do we blame God? We can be maybe angry with God at some points in time, but I hope that we always know and trust that God isn't punishing us with the calamities in our lives. That God is with us in and through all of those things, and that God gives us the strength and the ability to go on with life, even when life is hard.